Hello there, welcome to the RetroSaber podcast, where we always take the high ground. And today I want to look at something completely different to normal. I want to look at accessibility in video games. Now, this can cover a whole massive range of things, but basically what I'm looking at is what makes a game accessible for different people, and how important is it to factor that in when designing a game. I suppose the first question I should ask then is making a game accessible the most important thing? Well, yes and no. First of all, the most important thing is making a good game. But then, if people can't really play it, if there are barriers to people playing that game, whether they be physical barriers, aspects around themselves, or just something within the content that makes it difficult for them to enjoy it, then that's a problem. However, let's address the elephant in the room. A game has to be designed for the majority of people. Therefore, something that affects a minority of people isn't necessarily always going to be factored into every single game, nor should it be. But if there's ways that we can make things accessible for more people than ever and factor in as many different aspects, then there's absolutely no reason we shouldn't do that. So let's give an example. What kind of things make a game more accessible to more people? Well, let's start with something really simple, something that most of us take for granted, and that is difficulty levels. Now, you may ask, well, is the difficulty level of a game being adaptable really something that affects accessibility? Well, I'm here to tell you yes, it is, and I can give you one really good reason why that's the case. When I was younger, I used to commit hours upon hours to a game. I used to want to be able to complete it, or at least give a good go at the hardest difficulty levels. I wanted to be able to complete that game for every single character, complete it to 100%, and I had the time and capacity to do that. Now I don't. First of all, I'm a grown-ass man. I work full-time. I also have factors within family members who require care and support. Not to mention the fact that I'm actually running this YouTube channel on top of that. So me being able to play gaming in my own time simply for fun, I don't have that much time to commit to it. Does that mean, therefore, that I don't deserve to be able to see a game through to completion? Or I don't deserve to be able to enjoy a game? Having that difficulty level go up and down, it's not just a matter of proving you can complete it on the hardest difficulty, like some sort of gatekeeping exercise. It's actually there to allow people that for many different reasons can't play it on the harder difficulty levels to still be able to enjoy the game they've purchased. You might have people who have coordination difficulties. You might have people who have a whole host of challenges that make it difficult for them to complete a game on a harder difficulty. They still deserve the same right to enjoy that game as anybody else. And that difficulty level, being able to go up and down, allows accessibility for more people. It's something I'd taken for granted completely. But let's not stop there. The difficulty level is something that's been there for quite a while. While the earlier games in the 80s and 90s didn't necessarily have them, the vast majority of games do now. But what about other things? Well, controls. Games allowing us to tweak controls, some of them specifically allowing for left and right-handed controls, are really, really helpful. Some people can really struggle with certain types of controls, reaching for certain buttons. They might have difficulties with particular movements, and allowing controls to be able to be tweaked and customized to them gives them a better option of being able to play and access the game. Again, things that we take for granted within ourselves, other people might really struggle with, and allowing them to tweak the controls really helps with that. There's a whole host of things that make games accessible for people, especially games now that have full in-depth storylines. Things like simply having the captions on the screen, the subtitles that mean if someone is unable to hear because they're either deaf or hard of hearing, or simply speak different languages than the actual main game allows. Again, having the game be accessible in different languages, or at least the subtitles being in different languages, allows more people from more backgrounds to be able to play. So, all these things really help, and why not have them in? Do any of these things hinder anyone who doesn't need them by being there? No. So all these things that give accessibility to more people, that open up a game to make it more inclusive for more people, really helps. Now, that's not going to make it accessible for everyone. If someone is blind and deaf, that's not going to help. But at the same time, at least we've included as many people as we realistically could. Now, a game doesn't always have to tailor to everyone. An example of this is the fact that I'm epileptic. When I was younger, my epilepsies were triggered by photosensitivity. I never expected every single game to sit there and take out all the flashing lights, have an option that takes away flickering lights. That wouldn't be reasonable. And I know sometimes this happens now, that people expect everything, every game, every movie to adapt to their needs, to their whims. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's reasonable. What I did think was very fair and reasonable was for the games which a lot of them do and did have back then and do now, have that sort of photosensitivity warning on it to let people know this game does include strobe or flashing lights, so just be aware. It was then up to me to make that decision myself. The next thing I want to think about really is then the content. The reality is there is some content that just isn't going to be appropriate for everyone. And this is where accessibility is not necessarily about inclusivity. If a game is going to include violence, swearing, sexual content, drugs, all kinds of very adult stuff, well, it needs to be kept for adults. Inclusivity, in a sense, is kind of a red herring because we don't want games that are meant to be for everyone. We want games that are clearly identifying who they are for, so that people know what things they can access. Accessibility should be about telling people what kind of things are in the game. Now, this is where I'm going to potentially ruffle some feathers. One of the most overused words at the moment, and I understand the context of it, but I still feel like it's overused, is triggering or trigger warnings, all this sort of stuff. The reality is that whilst I understand there are situations and scenarios that for people are going to be very upsetting, even traumatizing. It could be to do with phobias or past events. It could just be something that you really disagree with because of religious or cultural reasons or political reasons. But in the end, a video game is still just a video game. And as much as these things can be upsetting, and there are certain contexts in which people should be made aware of the kind of stuff that might be in the game, there's also things that people just need to use their own common sense. Now, first of all, I think video games should absolutely give you an idea of roughly what is in it. If there is going to be swearing in a game, that you should be made aware of it. If there is going to be drug paraphernalia, scenes of violence, and especially scenes of nudity or sexual nature or sexual violence, then that should 100% be very clearly identified on the back of the game. There can also be issues around things like phobias and stuff like that, but unfortunately a game can't sit there and tell you every single thing that's going to be in it. Unfortunately, there's a bit where we sort of just have to take accountability for ourselves. And sometimes a thing might pop up in a game we don't like. Now, for some people, we might still just get along with it. For others, we might need to stop playing the game, and unfortunately, that's kind of tough. But the game itself can't be so carefully pandered to that there's nothing in there that could be upsetting. And I'm going to give a really good example. I have two main phobias. And the first one is moths, literally linking to a childhood traumatic incident, which I'm not going to get into. I can't stand moths. They really freak me out. Now, I played Resident Evil 2. This is a horror game, survival horror. I wasn't expecting a giant mutant moth to appear in the game. However, when it did, as much as it freaked me out, as much as the levels walking around where they're in their little pod catalyst things, I just got on with it. It was a video game. It made me feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, it was a horror game. So you would say, well, there you go, Saber, it's a horror game. You knew what you were getting into, even if you didn't know exactly. Well, my second phobia is mushrooms. Fungus in general. It disgusts me. It horrifies me. It freaks me out. The concept that people eat mushrooms, fungus, related to athlete's foot and other fungal infections, by the way, really unnerves me. I don't like it at all. Really freaks me out. Didn't see any particular trigger warnings on Super Mario Bros. To make me aware of that. But I also don't care. I don't like the fact that my character has to consume a mushroom in it every now and then, or that I'm talking to mushrooms. That in itself sounds kind of creepy now that I say it. But in the end, I just had to get on with it. I do understand there are going to be certain things that are going to put people in an uncomfortable position, especially if it touches on very strong social stances they take, or religious stances. Quite recently, I saw some posts by another great YouTuber who I see on here, PJ Venom, and I can't remember whether it was a video that he'd shared from another content creator, so I'm not trying to make anyone not get credit for their work, so I apologise for that. And it spoke about veganism and vegetarianism in video games, and the uncomfortableness for someone who is vegan when their character consumes meat for health. And let me be clear, I am not vegan, I am not vegetarian. However, there are aspects of that where I think it's a fair point. Now, does that mean I think there should be no meat eating in video games? No, not at all. In fact, in some video games, it would completely go against the reality of it, the accuracy of it, to take that out. It should absolutely be there in some games. However, I do think there's still a point there. A recent game I played, AEW Fight Forever, it's a wrestling game. I saw that game, I looked at it, I picked it up, I bought it, I took it home to play. At no point did it occur to me that food would be a factor in that. There was nothing about the game that told me it was. And then I notice my character, in between matches, has activities to do. And one of them, the only way to regenerate strength and health, is by going to restaurants to eat. Now, this had no impact on me. I didn't really care whether the food that was presented was food I liked or food that I couldn't stand. If it was mushroom stroganoff, as I've just pointed out, mushrooms disgust me, and the idea that anyone would eat them, I think, is just horrific. But I don't care, my character eats them. But for someone who's vegan, to suddenly be confronted with the idea of having to eat steak for their character might make them very uncomfortable. Especially given that this is a game where they wouldn't expect it. If this was a game about a caveman or a dinosaur eating things, then kind of tough, you'd see that coming. But in this game, you wouldn't. But this is where the game did something quite special. It gave the option, when you were picking your character and designing your character, to select vegan or non-vegan. Now, I looked at that and went, who cares? It's a video game. and selected non-vegan. And off I went. But it was later on when I saw this video in my stream about that I thought, actually, for some people, that would really increase the accessibility of the game. And this is where these things are quite good. This is where they're done well. They didn't take meat out of the game. They made it so that you could choose. If they took meat out of the game, that wouldn't actually make it more accessible. It would make it accessible to vegans, but then you could have people who have a carnivore diet. That is a real thing now, and is just as valid. You know, people have the right to live their life how they wish, and so it gave the options. Fair play. That's actually quite good. There's plenty of things like that really just aren't a factor for some people. Recently, I had started playing Hogwarts Legacy. I say recently, actually, it was like ages ago now. But still, the point being, I've been playing Hogwarts Legacy, and when you first start the game, you get to design your character. You choose how they look, whether they're male or female, what their hair colour is, what house they're in. And if I remember correctly, one of the things you do is choose their pronouns. Now, I am not someone that asks pronouns. I am not someone that would expect people to ask my pronouns. It's just not my thing. But at the same time, those being there has no impact on the game for me. It doesn't do any damage by being there. But for people who need that or value that, it's given them something that makes the game feel more comfortable. They may want to make a male character that has female or gender-neutral pronouns. And if they want to do that in their own game, crack on, why not? It doesn't affect me either way. So having these things in, and this is where accessibility is done at its best, it doesn't take away from one person in order to give another group what they want. It just gives the options. One thing that's never been an issue for me, but at the same time, I want to make it so that we consider all aspects when it comes to accessibility in a video game, is whether or not the character is like me. People have spoken about representation in movies and stuff, and I've never really minded too much when it comes to a video game. I've played characters who are worms in spacesuits, fish in tuxedos. I've played as dolphins. I've played as men and women. I've played as characters who are Egyptian, who are African, who are Japanese. I've played of characters of all different backgrounds, appearances, designs, and it's never really mattered to me with regards to accessibility in a video game. However, for some people, maybe it is. For some people, maybe they need the character to represent them a little bit to really enjoy it. I mean, if that's the case, I feel quite sorry for them because so many games rely on the character being a set model, and it's never going to appeal to everybody. It would not make a difference to me, and I don't think it makes a difference to too many people, but for those that it does, this is where it can be beneficial when games give options of characters. Now, obviously, customization is the perfect idea when you can design the character yourself, but not every game can do that. For example, plenty of games are based on set canon and story, so the character you're playing as is already established. So in those ones, it's just not possible. I do quite enjoy when video games give you a selection of characters, so you can pick one that feels most comfortable for you. Heck, in fighting games, accessibility is something sometimes about picking a fighting style that you feel comfortable with. Going back to games like Street Fighter 2, there were some people that just automatically took to Guile, or Ken, or Chun-Li, or Dalsim. Accessibility was not necessarily to do with whether or not that character had the same skin colour or ethnic background. You just related quite well to their fighting style. The other thing, and I suppose potentially the final thing to really think about is, does it matter what we do in a video game? In a sense, what I'm talking about is what our own social values are, our own personal values. I'm Catholic, so I have very clear things that I consider to be right and wrong. But it doesn't stop me doing it in a video game. I don't believe in violence necessarily. There might be specific reasons when it's valid, of course, but I would never want to be violent. I would actively try my best never to break the law, to not steal. I'd certainly avoid specifically trying to offend someone if I could. But at the same time, I don't care what I do in a video game. And I don't mean, by the way, going online and actually insulting other gamers. I mean what I'm doing to the characters in that game. I'll quite happily go on a killing spree in GTA. I don't think it affects who I am as a person in real life. But that said, there are still certain things that I'm not comfortable with. For example, I will never play a video game, such as Call of Duty, etc., that are based on real-life wars. I've got no problem waging a war against an army of zombies or space aliens or whatever else, but I refuse to play a video game that takes place specifically during and recreating battles from World War I, World War II. For me, that feels uncomfortable. People really died in that war. In those wars, sorry. My own granddad actually fought in the Second World War. So for me, that's not a source of video game. But that doesn't mean those games shouldn't exist because they would be offensive or uncomfortable for me. The game should still exist so that other people can enjoy it. They also shouldn't have to make a version of it that's accessible to me, that just doesn't include the World War. That's literally what the game's about. So accessibility comes with limits. Sometimes it's down to us to make choices that say, yeah, that game's not for me. There's one more thing that really, really is a barrier to accessibility in video games. How many video games now, even when the game has one-player versions, heavily encourage you to do online play? What about the fact that how many times does a game need updates? Need you to download content in order to be able to play it. You can't play it until you download the update. Well, why does that affect anything? Well, this is going to sound like a really crazy statement to many people nowadays, but what if someone doesn't have internet access? How could someone not have internet access? Actually, a lot of people don't. The vast majority of people on this planet do not have the internet. There's a really bizarre statement for you. It's the truth. We take it for granted, Wi-Fi, internet access in every room, but not everyone has it. Not everyone can afford it. And here's one of the key things about accessibility: financial accessibility to video games. Companies now are specifically trying to make it so that games remain at the highest cost. What used to happen was a game would come out, it would cost £40, for example, £50. And within a couple of weeks, a month, there'd be second-hand versions of it in shops that people that had financial restrictions could still play. But of course now, the gaming companies have convinced everyone that they want to download games rather than having physical copies. This means when you don't want it, when you get bored of it, it just sits there. You can't sell it on, and that means that someone with less money can't play it. They can't get it. They might be able to a year down the line when it's selling dirt cheap or the newest version comes out. But would they want it then? Should they have to wait that long? Well, do games need to be as expensive as they are? No, is the simple answer, by the way. They absolutely don't. And especially if people are downloading games, why the hell are we spending the same amount we would if we're actually buying a physical product that they have to make? It's very much a con. And the fact then, by the way, we've sold you the game, but you still have to buy tons and tons of additional content if you want to be able to play everything. Do you want to be able to play online with your friends? I hope you've got more money because the next season's out now. Doesn't matter whether you're left-handed, right-handed, hard of hearing, whether you're upset by the content. If you have financial restrictions that stop you from being able to buy the never-ending stream of additional content needed, or God forbid, you can't afford to pay bills for the internet that week, that month, well, guess what? Half your games won't play because you can't download the latest updates. Financial accessibility restrictions are probably one of the biggest things in gaming. But companies aren't going to talk about that. Instead, we'll shoehorn as many sort of political points we can get into video games. Look, we've included this. Aren't we great? Now spend £80 on it, please. Doesn't sound very accessible to me. In the end, video games are there for fun. Same as any other form of media. They're a piece of art, they're a piece of entertainment. Some of them are going to appeal to us, some of them aren't. Some of them are going to feel like they really hit everything we need. Others we're going to find deeply offensive, or we're going to think that some of the key things in it really just don't speak to us, maybe even offend us. That's okay. It's okay to be offended, by the way. It's actually really important sometimes. No one should live in an echo chamber where everything they see and hear, or everything they play, agrees with them. Being challenged sometimes can be a good thing. However, if you can't afford it, if you can't afford to continue playing it, really doesn't matter, does it? Anyway, I've gone off on a bit of a ramble here. My thoughts on what makes a game inclusive, accessible. Who knows? Maybe I'm talking nonsense. Maybe there's a lot of people out there that will agree with some of the things I've said. Maybe people will disagree with some of the things I've said. Please do comment below and let me know. I do genuinely like to hear different opinions. I don't want to live in an echo chamber where everyone just agrees with what I say. As long as your different opinions come with good manners and a fair bit of balanced argument, that's okay. In fact, I genuinely like it when people present me with stuff that challenges my views or opinions. Present an argument. Pick something that I've said here that you disagree with, or maybe something that you think that can be a barrier to gaming for people. What else gets in the way of people being able to access a game, be it physically, be it something about them? Maybe it can be something within the game that just makes it too difficult for them to be able to enjoy. Is it something that's in lots of games that I've not considered because it's not an issue for me? Please, let me know. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to have different ideas thrown at me. Challenge me. Agree with me if you want to. As long as you do it with good manners, that's all that matters. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to me ramble. I know when I do these things, these podcasts are very much me rambling. Half the time I don't even really keep any coherent notes of where I'm going with it. It just ends up being me just rambling away. So I really appreciate people taking the time to listen. Whatever you're up to today, have a great day. Whatever you're going to be doing this week, have a great week. And until next time, take the high ground.